Hi everyone, I'm Allison DeJager and I'm the president of List Self Storage. I'm excited to present the second installment of Tech Talks. Tech Talks provide informative reviews of technology products available to the self-storage industry. Each presentation lasts roughly 20 minutes and is pre-recorded for you to view at your convenience. So today we're joined by Kliebenstein and Lindsey, and we're going to chat about how self-storage real estate professionals can use StorTrack. So for those of you who don't know, StorTrack recently acquired List, which means we'll be adding new features and offering comprehensive data on listings. And while I know I'm biased because they're my boss now, I'm also biased because I really believe it's the best data in the industry. So just to get started, RK, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience?
Sure, thanks so much. I, like you, Allison, have a special affinity for StorTrack because there's a pretty wide variety of providers of data out there. And when I started talking early on with John at StorTrack, the principal, it became clear to me that we both had an alignment of vision. And for me, that alignment of vision is how do we get our industry to the point where machine learning or artificial intelligence can do my job? You know, I'm at the point in my career now where it's almost over. And so before I passed the baton, I thought, well, since nobody could do the job nearly as well as I could, except for John, I better pass it to somebody highly competent. I thought nothing better than a computer. So since Warren Buffett wasn't available, I decided that I'd go on a quest and find the best source of data I could find, the one that had the best track record, particularly in historical data, and was the most pliable. But when I met John and he started talking about artificial intelligence, in fact, it's, aggregate intelligence is in their name and AI is the initials they use, I knew we were really close in alignment. And we started talking about, gosh, what could we do? What kind of features could we build into a product? And that's what really sold me on StorTrack. There's some great providers out there, don't get me wrong. I think the competitive field, really great folks. But for me personally, it was a pretty easy decision.
Thanks, RK. And just to, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, and John, you've been had an opportunity to use the platform as well, and perhaps maybe to compare it to some of the other alternatives that are out there. And from a broker and investor standpoint, from your point, what kind of things are you looking for, and what drew you to StorTrack?
Yep, no, appreciate the intro, RK. For those who don't know me, my name's John Lindsey, co-founder and president of Lindsey Self-Storage Group. My family's been in the storage business since 1969, and we do work all over the US, Europe, and Asia, helping people buy and sell storage facilities. And RK, as you correctly asked me and pointed out, one of the things that drew me in here was the historical data available, the data that we use to help people buy and sell their facilities in certain market, with pricing and the new MVP product coming out as well. It's really kind of helped align my clients' interest in determining their values, their products in their market, and helping maximize their value at sale. Or on the buy side, helping clients enter new markets and better understanding the historical trends we've seen there, where the market may be going and shifting, and how the product compares to the competitors there in that market to help maximize their value as they continue to grow their product.
For sure. As Allison said, that List Self-Storage is now a part of the aggregate intelligence family. And what I was thinking is that just shows how progressive they are, that they know that there are platforms they need to acquire. They know there are pieces of the puzzle that need to be put together. And it's really fun to be on the perimeter of a company that's doing all those kind of great things. I'm not actually an employee. I'm non-compensated. I'm just a really, really, really diehard fan and an avid user of the product for sure.
Yeah, I totally echo your sentiments. It is a really cool team to be a part of, and everything is executed with a very a lot of strategy. There's just there's a lot of involvement. It's very cool. RK, so can you tell me just a little bit about the information that you look at from your side?
So, I look at it from two different real perspectives. First of all, as an investor, and then second of all, as an advisor to investors. And it's become really apparent to me that we, for a long time, have kind of relied a lot on seat of the pants data collection. And it wasn't really sophisticated until the Self-Storage Association actually started really putting an emphasis on data and trying to get our industry to align with some of the other real estate sectors. You know, the multifamily guys have had great collection of data for a long period of time. Same thing with the office and industrial park group. All those groups have really had sophisticated data tools. And that birthed companies like StorTrack and some of those others to come alongside the SSA in terms of aggregating all that information, putting it together, and then giving us tools that we can use to become not only better operators, but better developers and better acquirers, and so that we're more sophisticated investors all the way around. And that's really what I tell my investors is that you need to make data-driven decisions. That's the most important thing, is getting the information so that you can make an educated investment, and not to fly in the dark. There's no reason to. You have plenty of folks around you who can provide really good information.
Well, and I think, RK, on that note, as you can probably relate, back in the day, you could rely on along the model of you build it and they will come, when storage is in its infancy and really growing in new markets, new states. And now it has become such a hyper-competitive market that tools like List provide the opportunity for the single owner operator or regional operator to compete with the data that the larger REITs and larger operators are using. So all of a sudden, whether you're an investor or an operator or trying to look or buy and sell in a certain market, you know how to have those tools to compete with larger platforms and make intelligent data-driven decisions as opposed to just anecdotal information in a given market.
Absolutely. And we had a pretty big paradigm shift. It's probably been almost a decade ago. But when we moved from buying properties and valuing properties on a cap rate, which is how we did it in the old days, it was historical data for that particular property that drove 99% of our decisions. I remember back in the day working for a group, and I was told, look, you buy anything at a 10 cap. Doesn't matter what you buy. Some days you'll buy at a 9.5 cap. Some days it will be a 10.5, but you're buying at a 10 cap. And that was our goal, was to go out and buy at that rate. And almost all of our data collection was just, okay, what's the historical track record of that particular asset or group of assets? And today, no one really buys on a cap rate. I mean, cap rate has so many different definitions between the seller's cap rate, the investor's cap rate, the lenders. We all have different ways of calculating cap rate based on different NOIs that we generate. And so we're really looking for forward-looking projections. We're looking at yields and we're looking at internal rates of return. And those two metrics, those two defined return analysis require that we have good projections going forward. And that's the number one thing I hear from, whether it be large investors or small investors, is it seems like there's so many risks I can't mitigate. There's so many things I can't control, like capital markets. I can't control the interest rates. I can't even control the self-storage market because, it's occupancies, it's discounting, it's concessions, it's stabilization. I don't really have a lot of those things in my control. But the one thing that I can control are my assumptions that I use to project rental revenues. And that's the one thing that I think most investors and analysts, the analysts are really, really key and important to this. That's their Achilles heel. And if we can provide something to kill the kryptonite in that, I think that's what getting and gathering good data does. It's just a kryptonite killer for the bad things that can happen if you don't pay attention to what's there. And we also have had kind of a shift, I think, and I'd be curious to know how it influences your decisions, is that we went from a point in time, because at any day you could go into Google and pick up a search of everybody who is in the 3-mile radius. And then you would just click on their website and you'd see the rates for the day, right? Okay, so if 3 of you guys are at $150 for a 10 by 10, so the rate has to be $150 for a 10 by 10. And that's old school. To me, today it's, well, what's the web rate versus the walk-in rate? And then what discounts are applied to that? What concessions are applied to that? And we have this really, really big group of shifting sands. And, it is so much more complicated than it used to be. That old 10 by 10 ambient drive-up unit that was the staple of all self-storage metrics, right? I mean, if you knew the 10 by 10 cost, you knew how to pro forma any property in the country. And that's changed a lot. What do you see, John, when you're working with your own sellers who you're trying to help them with valuation, or with buyers who are trying to get to valuation?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we're utilizing with this platform are existing rental rates in the market. Sometimes sellers are undervaluing their properties when they come to me, and then we look at their rent in comparison to their competitors. They haven't raised the rents in 20 years and they're sitting at half of market and they're full. Well, there's a lot of upside on that for a potential seller in order to maximize their value at sale. On the buy side, when we're entering a market and looking at an opportunity, if they're buying a site and we look at the competitive data and we say, hey, this site you're buying is the highest rates in town, we're going to take that heavily into consideration when building out the pro formas moving forward for that particular acquisition. Now, on top of that, in line with historical data trends of population growth, we can also see where the trends have gone for rental rates. For instance, if there's been an oversupply in the market, we may have seen a downward trend in rental rates over time. We can see how quickly that's occurred, what we think the bounce back from that will be based on pipeline moving forward. So there's a lot of adjustments that can be made around that in the models and the cap rates, as you correctly pointed out, that are applied to these acquisitions or sales. But at the end of the day, it's determining what works for you in that market with the current rates that are in place and your hold period and how long you think that's going to affect your investment that you make in that particular asset.
Yeah, so that's a really good way to look at it. And that kind of sophistication certainly has to be a big value add to your clients as you're working with them both on the buy and the sell side. Allison, I'm going to go ahead and open up a window here with StorTrack.
Yeah,
and what I want to do, John, is maybe share with you some tools that will help you in this process of understanding how StorTrack can maybe get you that data. So what you're looking at on my screen, I think we have a good share, do we not, Allison?
You're good, yes.
All right, great. So this is my dashboard on the MVP product, which is Market View platform. And this is what we call the dashboard that really gets us going for properties. And every time I put a property in, it saves that property data for me, and it's very easy then to go to those. And over here, I have some different properties, again, that are shown up so I can access them a couple of different ways. So what I'd like to do is just go into one of the properties that I've been looking at recently and maybe kind of walk you through a couple of things that might help you as you're looking at it. So I click on a property. This one happens to be in the Atlanta market. I've been working the Atlanta market pretty hard for the last few weeks and just trying to find opportunities there, particularly for development. And this is what we call a palette now. And the palette is where we create our own internal dashboard, if you will. And over here we have different what we call widgets. And these widgets allow us all different kinds of data points that we're able to look at. So for example, I basically start any search really with an all stores list. I want to know who the competitors are. So I'll just click on all stores and on widget. And in just a few moments, you'll see it begin to populate. There you go. So John, this is a good place I encourage folks to start at because it gives you a good inventory of the existing product that's there. And it's going to give us square footages, which is nice, both total and rentable. Typically, it'll give us opening years or dates and rate volatility. So rate volatility is interesting because it tells me whether or not they're using revenue management products. So you'd expect the big guys to have fairly high rate volatility. But then you find interesting data like a CubeSmart that only has a 16%, which means that their rates are very, very stable, but there's not a lot of movement in those rates. And this gives me an offering of what kind of product they have, what's available at this current time will show up. So I'm betting that today they don't have any climate control in larger sizes at that property. And in fact, it looks like they're pretty highly occupied in all their larger sizes. But the first thing I do is I go to my all stores list and look for inventory. And I can sort these, I can put them on a map if I want, but this really gives me a great opportunity to determine who my competitive set is. And then I'll usually go to the executive summary because I like to just get a really short one sentence overview picture of what that market looks like. And what this will give me is the square foot per capita. It tells me that there are 10 stores. In this particular case, I'm using a 3-mile radius, and I can select different radii to use. But I typically default to a 3-mile radius. And this just tells me a little bit about the current supply. So there's 5.39 square foot per capita. And I can look right away and compare that to the US average and to the Georgia state average. So all that information is right here for you, John. And it helps you to get a good start right off the bat to know where you're at as a basis point in the supply side of it. And then I go to rate trends, and this is really the one that is the most important to me, is to see what's happening in that market on a real-time basis. And this is saying that in the last 3 months, the rates have gone down by a little over 12.5%. And again, that's important, particularly when you start comparing it to the national, which is down by 1.21%, and Georgia, which is 5.63%. So this tells me there is a weakness in this market right off the bat. And now I want to start to be very cautious about this location, knowing that there is high rate volatility in some of the competitors, and that rates are trending downward, at least in the last 3 months. This will tell me a little bit about what kind of promotions are being used. And then, John, I don't know how you find it, but I sure am always interested to know where new developments are in that project, because that's going to help me to forecast going forward what could be there to impact me in terms of rates, because we typically know that in the new developments, they're going to discount rates in order to get occupancy. They're buying occupancy. And so that helps me. And interesting to note that StorTrack is currently tracking almost 1,300 developments across the US today. So it's a pretty good database. It's a healthy database. So John, out of these things, any one of those that seems more important to you than another in the executive summary?
Well, RK, I love the new development pipeline. That is tremendous, because back in the day, again, saturation wasn't really even a concern 10 years ago. It just wasn't as much on the map as, outside of the major markets. But now pretty much everywhere in the US, one of the first questions I'm asked by buyers and sellers, is there any new competition coming in? Because even if you have great data, great rents, great historicals, if you have a new site coming in down the mile, that completely throws your existing market. And so, if you've got, for instance, with this site, high volatility, a major decrease in rent, and if you were to also have a new site coming in on top of that, I would be, very weary to get into a market such as this. So, from a buyer or seller standpoint, we know very quickly what the obstacles are going to be in just a short 5 minutes running through here. And back in the day, when I first got into this business, I was pounding the phones for my father, calling different city municipalities, asking if, permitting has had any new sites coming in. As you well know, that takes time and energy to even get a call back from them. And this platform is able to provide it in the snap of a finger.
Yeah, it's very, very useful to have it on a quick basis. And you'll want to corroborate the data. You'll still want to make those calls as you get into your deeper due diligence. But at least here in the first pass at it, it's great to have a resource that will give us the highline. One thing I would encourage you to do, John, is if you're looking at this as a 3-mile radius, because we see the influence of new stores in on a radius-based search, I typically go out and look at the 10-mile right away, or the 5-mile if it's a fairly tight suburban market, so that I can see not just what's in my 3-mile market that's new, but there are maybe new competitors 4.5 miles away, that when I draw a 3-mile ring around that competitor and a 3-mile ring around my store, I can see that overlap, and I begin to understand how that influences the base that I'm going to draw from in my markets. And so given that, I usually go back and we'll move this out to 5 miles and take a look at it to see if I'm picking up any new developments. So that's one thing you may want to do when you're in there, is just reach out for a larger radius and then come back to your 3-mile.
Well, no, that's great. And it's a perfect point to make, because a lot of people at times they say, well, I don't have anyone building in the 1 or 2 or 3 mile. But as you just correctly stated, there's that compounding effect. That oversupply 5, 6, 7 miles away in different directions begins to eventually affect you by the law of where those facilities are located. So again, a great thing to look at, RK, and I'm really glad you pointed out, because sometimes it's hard to recognize those impacts day one when they're not building just right next door to you.
And up here at the top, John, another thing you'll find that's pretty useful is the average rate per square foot. And so it's going to give us the three different metrics, which are the total store, the ambient, and then the climate control. But do keep in mind, in the climate control, this is a blend between both the upstairs units and the downstairs units if it's multi-story. So you do need to do a data check to make sure that you're really forecasting correctly. If you're fortunate enough to have an all ground floor climate control building like I did in Orlando, that would be a great example of where we had all of our climate control units were on the ground floor. We were able to drive the premium for that. But most stores are going to be multi-story climate control, and so this $1.29 rate at this particular store, that can change based on the fact that you may have upstairs versus downstairs space. In suburban Atlanta, the further you get away from the city center, the more likely you are to have larger sites where a number of sites will have a fair amount of climate control, and it'll all be ground floor. So the next thing I really like to look at is this rate per square foot and the historical rates, because the historical rates tell me what's been happening over a period of time. So I'm just going to pull over it as one of my widgets, the rate per square feet history graph. And this is really interesting, John, and when you get into this, it allows you the flexibility of looking at all units or going into a specific unit sizing. So for example, if I were doing a multi-story climate control building, my average unit size is probably going to be somewhere between 100 and 120 square feet. So I'll probably peg to a 10 by 10 climate control. Whereas if I were doing an all suburban store that was mostly ambient, it'd probably be closer to 150 square foot. So it might be a 10 by 15. So I'll just go ahead and change this now and put the metric at looking at only 10 by 10 climate controls in that market. And here again, it's a ability to compare this to the subject property, the national totals, and in this case in blue, the Georgia totals. But what's really going to help you out, I think, is to look at the timing of this. So the metrics you're looking at here are for a 3-month period, but I can open this up and get all the way back to 3 years and get a look at where rates have been in an overall of a 3-year period. And that's where I think using tools that give you the history, because StorTrack's been pulling this data for years, and that gives us an opportunity. So the black marks are the subject property or market, and again, the green is the national and blue is Georgia. But this allows me to see, you can see that the state and the national trend almost equally throughout the entire process, but we've had a fair number of spikes where we had perhaps a better market in 2019 in this submarket than we did on a state or a national basis. But recently, it's just now recovering and getting back into the median of those two. So I think it's really important to be able to get a feeling for where rates have been, to be able to drill down to a specific size and a specific type of product, whether it's climate controlled or ambient, and then also to just be able to take whether or not you want to look at trend lines, which then nominalize everything and give you kind of a good example of it. But boy, look what's happened in this market to rates over the last 3 years. And it wasn't really evident when we looked at it at the individual rates, but once you put it into a trend line, it really becomes clear that this is a market, despite the fact that there were a bunch of negative things that perhaps we saw early on. This tells me that the market's trending the correct way, and maybe I need to take a stronger look at that particular property.
Well, and RK, that's something I think is great, because a lot of times when we're working with a buyer who's entering a new market, especially if it's a little more tertiary, they say, hey, can you just give us a high level of what we're looking at here? And to be able to go in and say, hey, we've seen positive rate trends for the past 1, 2, 3 years, and show them this trend line, that's tremendous. And then same on a seller side, especially if they haven't raised their rents in years, and we say, hey, your rates have been trending up for years now, and you haven't raised yours. That's icing on the cake to go and pitch this product when we go to sell it to buyers. There's a good story to be told that associates with this.
The other thing that you can do, John, is you can drill down to specific stores. So for example, in this market, I could go to a number of different stores and make actual comparisons of where they are in their rate history. So for example, in the premium units here or value units, I can look at, again, individual sizes. But what's really great is I can compare 3 stores in that market. So I could take the Public Storage that's a competitor, I can add it to it, the Extra Space, and add a U-Haul. So I can select up to 3 of these, and I typically will, at the first, take those that are closest to me and take a look at those. But as I start to refine my due diligence, I'll pick those properties that are the closest competitors in type of product, proximity, rates, everything, and just try and profile a really close one. If I'm looking at an all ambient drive-up project, I might disregard to some extent those multi-story climate controls because they're going to have a different profile. So I can really narrow it down now. And again, I can look at the last 3 months or take this all the way out to 3 years and begin to understand and compare rents in specific stores and how they compare to one another in the basis. And I'm wondering if something like that might be really useful, again, to yourself and your clients as you're trying to price a property either for an offer or for a listing.
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head. You know, sometimes when we're looking at these average rate trends in market, it's hard to show someone that, hey, you know, although that multi-story climate controlled is sitting at $1.40 and you're at $1, you know, we can eliminate that from our rent comps as far as, because you have traditional single story product, you know, when you're comparing your rental rate trends versus theirs, it's 2 totally different types of product and customer base. And although there is a relation, we need to compare similar products at the end of the day to really get an accurate rental rate portrayal of where we can go and where we have been. So to be able to isolate those stores that I think more accurately reflect or are geographically, you know, more closely located to the subject property really provides a lot of value.
Cool. Well, I hope that we've been able to share some tools with you today, John, that will continue to keep you as one of the premier brokers in the industry and one of the real go-to guys for both sellers and buyers who are looking for great advice. And, you know, I personally wish as an investor that all the brokers were as sophisticated as you are and took the time and the diligence to go through and look at the data behind it instead of just, you know, taking a look at the market on one given day that may not fully represent what that opportunity looks like from either a buy or a sell side. So, you know, I want to thank you for being one of the industry leaders out there, because I know that when I get information from you and your group, I know it's good, solid, well-researched stuff. So I appreciate that a lot as an investor and an advisor to investors.
Well, and RK, I appreciate that as well. And I've had a great time working with you over the past decade and looking forward to continuing the relationship and building using great platforms like this. And, you know, Allison, as always, appreciate the opportunity to take a look at, you know, wonderful products you guys have coming out, and looking forward to seeing this continue to be hopefully utilized as the go-to tool in the industry.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. I really appreciate it. This is just like such great information and everything. And everyone else, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, feel free just to give me a call, 248-795-8126, or you can shoot me an email, Allison, ALISON, at listselfstorage.com. And yeah, thanks so much, you guys.
Hey, John, how do we get a hold of you?
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
Thanks, Allison. No, you can always.
I had one job.
You can visit our website, lindseyselfstoragegroup.com. You can email me directly, john@lindseyselfstoragegroup.com. You can call, text, FaceTime, WhatsApp me on my cell phone. The number is 919-381-7799.
Cool. And John, I'll give you my email address just in case you don't have it, because you haven't sent me more than 3 emails in the last hour. So that tough one to remember, which is rk@askrk.com. You know, for an old guy, I had to make it as absolutely easy as I possibly could, because I'd forget it if it were too complicated. But sure, drop me an email. I'll be happy to shoot you over the PDF versions of any of those graphs we looked at, so that if you'd like to go through them, I'd be happy to spend time with you and help you to understand how we can use those and leverage that information for you.
That'd be great. Really appreciate it, RK. And again, Allison, thank you as always for hosting us, and looking forward to doing this again in the future with you guys.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Allison.
Thank you.
Thanks,
everyone.
Bye.